필수야, 뭐 하는 거야, 지금 이거? 진짜 필수야?
똑바로 하세요, 똑바로.
Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into the complete storyline and breaking down the epic recap of Reborn as a Kingmaker of my useless Chaebol dad. Before we unpack this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. This is an emotional drama filled with intense family politics, unexpected alliances, and unforgettable moments that will keep you hooked from beginning to end. Without further ado, let's get into the recap.
My name was Gangri. I was once the proud princess of the Era Kingdom. My life was filled with grace and royal duties, but fate had a cruel twist waiting for me on the day of my coming-of-age ceremony. A tragic accident took my life. When I opened my eyes again, the palace was gone. I found myself trapped in a strange and unfamiliar era. I had awakened in the fragile body of a young girl named Dana. Dana was a tragic soul. She was born into a vastly wealthy family, yet her life was nothing short of a living nightmare. Her own biological parents treated her worse than the dirt beneath their shoes. They favored her sister and stripped Dana of every basic right. The servants openly mocked her. She was locked in dark storage rooms and starved. She was a legitimate daughter treated like a cursed outcast. I could feel the lingering pain of the original Dana. Why did I awaken in this pitiful state? Her own family was planning something vile. They wanted to marry her off to the intellectually disabled son of a rival. They saw her merely as a disposable business tool. It was a heartless move to secure a corporate alliance. I refused to let this injustice stand. Even tigers do not bite their own young. These people were monsters. I walked into the grand hall where the family was gathered. My so-called parents glared at me with pure disgust. They yelled at me to get out of their sight. I did not flinch. I was a royal princess of Era. I stood tall and faced the most powerful man in the room. He was the chairman of the family conglomerate. He was Dana's grandfather. I spoke with a calm and icy tone that shocked everyone present in the room. I told him I had a formal request. I said that a child usually resembles their parents, but my father lacked any parental grace. Therefore, I respectfully asked the chairman to change my father immediately. The room erupted in chaos. My biological father screamed in rage. He called me ungrateful and insane. He demanded I be sent to a mental hospital, but the chairman simply raised his hand to silence the room. The old man looked at me with deep intrigue. He saw a spark of his own youthful boldness in my eyes. He asked me who I wanted as my new father. I did not hesitate. I pointed directly at a man lounging in the corner. His name was Gang Yun. He was the chairman's third son. He was the disgraced playboy of the family. He spent his days racing cars, gambling, and clubbing. He even kept a pet panda instead of working. Everyone gasped in horror. They laughed at my choice. They said he would feed me to wild animals when drunk. Even Gang Yun himself looked utterly confused. He asked if I was out of my mind to choose him. I looked Gang Yun dead in the eye. I told him he was my choice. He scoffed at his cruel brother. He declared he might be a fool, but he would never sell a child for business. He accepted me as his new daughter. The deal was struck. I left my abusers behind. I held the hand of the disgraced son. We walked out of the grand hall together. This was the first step in my grand plan. I would make him the true king of this house. Gang Yun took me to his extravagant home. It was filled with loud colors and expensive toys. He told his servants to buy everything in the department store for me. He promised to give me the stars if I asked. I smiled at him warmly. I told him I chose him because I felt a connection. In truth, his face resembled my beloved father from my past life. Being loved by him was a blessing I never expected in this strange era. But Gang Yun was still heavily flawed. The head butler complained to me constantly. My new father was always out partying. He ignored his duties. I decided it was time to train him properly. A king needs discipline. My new life with Gang Yun began with a massive overhaul. He was kind, but he was completely irresponsible. He left me home alone while he raced cars and partied. I knew I had to break his bad habits immediately. I sat in the vast living room pretending to cry softly. The butler panicked and called Gang Yun to return home. When he rushed through the door, I looked up with tearful eyes. I asked him why he never stayed with me. He stammered and made excuses about being busy. I asked him if his sports cars and clubs were more important than me. I told him a servant said his cars were his real treasure. I asked if he truly did not love me. Gang Yun was instantly heartbroken by my tears. He yelled for the butler to sell all his limited edition cars. But I was not finished yet. I asked him about the pet panda he loved to cuddle and call his baby. I cried harder and said he must love the panda more. I told him I felt like I would never be loved by anyone. He immediately ordered the panda to be sent to the zoo. He then canceled all his club memberships. The servants watched in absolute shock and awe. The chairman himself had never been able to control Gang Yun, yet a few tears from a small child had completely tamed the wild playboy. He was finally changing. He sat beside me and gently wiped my fake tears away. He promised that I was the only treasure he needed now. I smiled inwardly at my swift victory. Now it was time to prepare him for the real battlefield. A few days later, a message arrived from the main estate. The chairman wanted to see me, but Gang Yun refused. He said his father always despised him and he did not want to go. I convinced him to go anyway. When we arrived, the older brother sneered at my father. He expected Gang Yun to be a messy and drunken embarrassment. But the chairman was already informed of the recent changes. He knew the cars and panda were gone. The old man looked at Gang Yun with a hint of hope. He decided to test this sudden miraculous transformation. He offered my father a monumental challenge. If he succeeded, he would receive a massive reward. The chairman told Gang Yun to attend his upcoming birthday, but he had to arrive looking and acting like a dignified heir. If he could prove he was a real gentleman, he would be given a skyscraper in Gangnam. It was a 30-story building worth a massive fortune. Gang Yun initially refused the offer outright. He hated formal events and strict etiquette, but I quickly accepted on his behalf and dragged him away. The training began the very next morning at our house. I made him balance books on his head while walking. I scolded his posture and fixed his atrocious manners. I told him true dignity comes from a strong core. He whined and complained like a small child every day, but I pushed him relentlessly until his form was perfect. The rivals thought we would fail miserably. I was determined to prove every single one of them wrong. The night of the chairman's birthday banquet finally arrived. The grand hall was filled with elites and greedy relatives. Everyone waited eagerly for Gang Yun to make a fool of himself. They expected loud clothes. The doors opened and a hush fell over the entire room. Gang Yun stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored suit. His hair was slicked back and his posture was flawless. He looked exactly like a powerful king. The relatives whispered in absolute shock and disbelief. He walked up to the chairman with perfect grace and bowed. He wished his father a long and healthy life. The chairman beamed with unprecedented pride. The old man immediately signed the deed to the building. He handed the Gangnam skyscraper over to my father. The rivals boiled with intense jealousy and rage. They realized Gang Yun was now a real threat to them. To reclaim the spotlight, they pushed my cousin Wara forward. The grandmother announced Wara had prepared a special gift. She was going to play a lost ancient melody on the Geomungo to impress the chairman. The chairman loved the history of the Era Kingdom. The song was the Unheichi Njunga written by Princess Gangri. They had bought a fragmented sheet of the music at an auction. Wara began to pluck the strings. Her performance was clumsy and lacked any real soul. She stopped abruptly because the music sheet was incomplete. The chairman sighed in disappointment at the sudden end. This was the perfect moment for my move. I stepped forward and politely addressed the chairman. I announced that I had also prepared a musical gift. The older brother immediately mocked me. He said a country bumpkin like me knew nothing of fine arts. I calmly stated I would play the entire Onheichi Njunga. The room erupted in loud scoffs and harsh laughter. They said the full song was lost to history. They dared me to prove my impossible claim right there. I sat before the instrument and took a deep breath. This was the song I wrote for my father 10 centuries ago. I closed my eyes and let my fingers dance across the strings. The pure melody echoed through the hall. The music was so profoundly beautiful that it felt magical. The notes flowed like a gentle river of pure sorrow and joy. Suddenly, beautiful butterflies flew into the banquet hall. They danced gracefully around me. The music scholars in the room stood up in pure shock. They confirmed it was the authentic lost masterpiece. They said only a true master could summon butterflies with music. The chairman was overjoyed by my skill. He declared it was the greatest gift he had ever received. To reward my brilliance, he granted me a 10% share. My father and I were now a formidable power in the company. The rivals glared at us in silence. Later that evening, the eldest brother retreated to his study. His face was twisted in dark fury and deep resentment. He picked up his phone and made a sinister call. He ordered someone to initiate a deadly plan. The eldest brother sat alone in his dimly lit private study. His heart pounded with a poisonous mix of deep fear and rage. He had spent his entire life playing the perfect heir. Now a disgraced fool threatened everything he built. He dialed a secret secure number he kept for emergencies. A gruff voice answered quietly on the other end of the line. The brother ordered them to proceed with the final deadly plan. Gang Yun could no longer be allowed to exist. He poured himself a large glass of expensive dark whiskey. The golden liquid burned his throat but calmed his frayed nerves. He remembered how easily the chairman gave away that building. It was a direct insult to his loyalty. Wara had been utterly humiliated in front of the high elite. Her clumsy performance was a stain on their pristine noble image. Meanwhile, the little adopted rat had stolen all the grand glory. It was completely unacceptable to him. He vowed to crush Gang Yun before this current week was over. The underworld contacts he hired were ruthless and highly efficient. They would stage a tragic, unfortunate accident for the playboy. No one would suspect any foul play. The quiet ride back to our extravagant mansion was full of joy. Gang Yun could not stop laughing and praising my grand performance. He held the shiny deed to the Gangnam skyscraper like a trophy. He was acting like a happy child. He told me I was truly the greatest daughter in the whole world. He promised to buy me anything my little heart truly desired now. I just smiled softly and told him I only wanted him to be safe. I knew our enemies were moving in. The loyal head butler greeted us warmly at the grand entrance. He was astonished to see my father looking so regal and highly sober. Gang Yun tossed his tailored, expensive suit jacket on the couch. He declared a new era had begun. I went straight up to my luxurious bedroom and locked the door. I walked over to the large silver mirror and stared at my reflection. This child's pale face was still so unfamiliar to my old eyes, but her strong spirit was my own. We had won the grand battle tonight, but the real war had started. The fierce chairman was a fickle man who only valued absolute power. I had to ensure my new father remained perfectly sharp and focused. One wrong move means death. That peaceful night, I dreamed of my beautiful past in Era Kingdom. The grand palace gardens were filled with vibrant blooming flowers. My royal father would sit happily and listen to my music for hours. The memories felt so vivid. The grand Unheichi in Junga was a song of deep, pure familial love. I composed it to celebrate the beloved king's grand birthday banquet. Hearing those clumsy fools ruin my pure melody angered my soul. I had to protect my legacy. When I finally woke up, the morning sun was streaming through glass. The soft white sheets of my modern bed felt completely different to me. The brutal reality of this corporate royal family quickly set in. This world was ruthless. I dressed very quickly and went down to the grand huge dining room. Gang Yun was already sitting there reading a complex business report. This was a shocking sight compared to his usual severe hangovers. My training was working. He looked up quickly and greeted me with a very bright, warm smile. He said he truly wanted to learn how to manage his massive new building. He realized that grand wealth without true power was useless. He was acting like a ruler. News of the grand banquet spread rapidly through the corporate world. Everyone was quietly whispering about the playboy's miraculous return. Stocks tightly tied to my father's name began to rise heavily. The balance was shifting. But I quickly noticed strange men lingering near our estate gates. The hidden security cameras caught dark, heavy vehicles watching us closely. The eldest brother was moving his shadowy, silent chess pieces. He was preparing to strike. I warned my dear father to increase the mansion's perimeter security. I told him to hire elite private guards who were heavily armed today. He trusted my sharp instincts completely and made the urgent calls. He knew I was brilliant. We had to strike first before they could quickly ruin our hard work. I needed to secretly investigate the eldest brother's hidden finances. There had to be dark corruption I could expose to the chairman. A king destroys his rivals. I opened my sleek modern laptop and began to search the vast networks. The digital modern world was strange, but I learned it all very quickly. I was Princess Gangri, and I would never be a weak victim again. The true battle begins. The modern world was a strange web of glowing screens and invisible data. I learned to navigate these digital rivers with the same grace I once used in the royal court. I was Princess Gangri, and I would never become a weak victim. I scoured the financial records of the eldest brother with intense focus. His name was Gang Hayek, and he was a man driven entirely by his massive ego. He left careless digital footprints across numerous offshore shell corporations. Gang Hayek had been secretly siphoning company funds to build his own army. He paid off corrupt politicians and hired ruthless mercenaries from the deep shadows. This was exactly the kind of treason my royal father would punish. I compiled every piece of damning evidence into a highly secure file folder. I needed to present this to the chairman at the perfect strategic moment. Revealing it too early would give the eldest brother time to hide his crimes. My new father walked into the study carrying a plate of fresh, sweet fruits. He looked at my glowing laptop screen with a mix of awe and deep confusion. He asked me how a small child could understand such complex banking networks. I smiled innocently and told him I simply loved reading numbers and charts. Gang Yun chuckled and patted my head with genuine fatherly affection. He was completely unaware of the dark storm that was rapidly approaching our home. The attack happened later that evening while we were driving into the city. Our reinforced vehicle was suddenly rammed by a heavy black armored truck. The deafening sound of crushing metal echoed through the empty dark highway. My father reacted instantly and threw his strong body over my small frame. The glass shattered into a million sparkling pieces across the leather seats. Our highly trained security detail immediately returned heavy suppressive fire. Gang Yun held me incredibly tight and promised me everything would be okay. His heart was pounding rapidly against my ear like a frantic battle drum. I felt a surge of pure rage toward the cowards who dared to attack a young child. Our driver managed to spin the damaged car around and speed away to safety. We left the violent ambush behind us in a thick cloud of burning black smoke. The war for the corporate throne had officially escalated into real bloodshed. We arrived back at the heavily guarded mansion surrounded by police sirens. Gang Yun was furious and immediately demanded a full investigation into the crash. He was no longer the careless playboy who ignored his family duties. He stood in the grand foyer barking strict orders to his elite security chief. He demanded every inch of our estate be locked down and heavily fortified. He swore he would utterly destroy whoever dared to endanger his beloved daughter. I sat quietly on the velvet sofa while a medic carefully checked my vitals. I was physically unharmed, but my mind was racing with cold, calculated plans. The eldest brother had shown his hand, and now it was my turn to strike back. The chairman called an emergency family meeting the very next sunny morning. The grand boardroom was tense and filled with silent, venomous accusations. Gang Hayek sat at the long table looking completely unbothered and overly smug. The chairman demanded to know who was responsible for the highway ambush. Gang Hayek feigned total ignorance and blamed rival corporate business enemies. He claimed my father's sudden rise to power had angered the wrong wealthy people. I stood up from my small leather chair and walked toward the massive screen. I plugged in my secure drive and projected the hidden financial documents. The room gasped as offshore accounts linked directly to Gang Hayek appeared. I explained in a clear, calm voice how these hidden funds matched the mercenaries. The exact sum paid to the attackers was withdrawn from his secret bank account. The paper trail was absolutely undeniable and completely flawless. The chairman's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson as he read the screen. He slammed his heavy cane against the hardwood floor with a terrifying force. He demanded a full explanation from his favorite eldest son immediately. Gang Hayek panicked and began screaming that the documents were totally forged. He pointed a shaking finger at me and called me a demonic manipulative witch. He said a small peasant child could never uncover such complex financial webs. The chairman did not care about his pathetic excuses or loud angry shouting. He ordered the security guards to physically remove Gang Hayek from the building. The golden child had fallen and my father was now one step closer to the top. The chairman dismissed the remaining board members with a single wave of his wrinkled hand. He looked at Gang Yun with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. He declared that the third son would now take over all major operations. My father stood up slowly and bowed deeply to the old man. He promised to lead the family business with total honor and strict integrity. I smiled proudly from my seat. The useless playboy was finally acting like a true royal heir. News of the massive shift in power spread through the city like a wild raging fire. The media praised the miraculous redemption of the youngest Chaebol son. Stocks soared higher than ever before. We had completely won the first war. Our peaceful victory was suddenly interrupted by a pathetic scene at our front gates. My biological parents arrived begging for forgiveness on their knees. The mother who once starved me now cried fake tears of absolute deep remorse. They claimed they had made a terrible mistake and wanted their dear daughter back. They saw my 10% stake in the company and wanted to steal my wealth. Gang Yun walked out to the gates with a cold and terrifying expression. He told them they had lost all parental rights the day they locked me in a dark shed. He ordered the guards to throw them onto the dirty street. He warned them never to approach his precious daughter again or face his full wrath. We visited the massive new skyscraper that Gang Yun won at the grand birthday banquet. It was a towering monument of glass and steel reaching into the bright blue sky. My father named it the Era Tower in honor of my special song. He set up a grand office on the very top floor overlooking the sprawling, busy city. He hired the best financial experts to help him manage the growing corporate empire. I spent my afternoons sitting on a plush sofa reading books. He never made a single major business decision without asking for my silent approval. He trusted my ancient royal instincts more than any modern university degree. We were an unstoppable team of two souls bound by destiny and love. Despite our massive success, I knew the war was not completely over yet. Gang Hayek had been exiled from the company, but he was still a very dangerous man. He had connections in the dark underworld that money could easily buy again. I ordered our private security chief to keep a close watch on the eldest brother. I wanted daily reports on his movements and his secret late-night phone calls. A smart princess never turns her back on a wounded, desperate animal. I prepared myself for the next phase of this intense corporate battlefield. I would protect my new father and our growing empire at any cost. The Era Kingdom would rise again in this modern world of greed and endless ambition. The dark night descended upon the sprawling city like a heavy velvet blanket. I stood by the massive windows of Era Tower. The glowing neon lights below looked like tiny scattered stars across the vast and endless modern urban landscape. My mind drifted back to the ancient days of the glorious Era Kingdom. I remembered the grand battles my royal father fought to secure our borders. This corporate world was no different. Blood was replaced by money and swords by stock. Gang Yun walked into the grand office carrying 2 cups of warm sweet cocoa. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were filled with a bright new purpose. He handed me a cup and smiled warmly. He said we had a very busy week ahead of us now. I took a gentle sip of the warm cocoa and nodded in quiet agreement. We were scheduled to meet with foreign investors from across the ocean. These men were notorious for their ruthless tactics. We had to be perfectly prepared for them. The next morning, our grand boardroom was filled with imposing foreign men. They wore sharp, expensive suits and carried thick, heavy briefcases. They looked at my father with barely concealed doubt. They still saw the foolish young playboy. The lead investor was a tall man with cold, piercing gray eyes. He demanded unreasonable terms and threatened to pull his massive funding. He spoke quickly, hoping to confuse my father with complex financial jargon. He was severely mistaken. Gang Yun leaned back in his leather chair and laughed a deep, booming laugh. He countered their aggressive terms with absolute flawless precision. He dismantled their entire strategy piece by tiny piece. The foreign men were utterly stunned. I sat quietly in the corner observing the entire intense exchange. I had spent the whole weekend teaching him how to project pure royal authority. He commanded the room like a true ancient king. The investors quickly signed the new deal. Meanwhile, the exiled brother Gang Hayek was brewing a toxic new poison. Our security chief reported that he was meeting with underground hackers. If he could not kill my father physically, he wanted to destroy our entire digital fortress. A massive cyber attack hit the main servers of the Era Tower at midnight. They tried to wipe out all our secure financial data and client records. The alarms blared loudly through the empty dark hallways. The digital war had just begun. I rushed to the main server room with our top-tier tech security team. I did not understand modern coding, but I understood tactical defense. I ordered them to sever the main connection entirely to trap the vicious invading virus inside. The quick, bold move saved our most precious confidential client data. The hackers were locked out of the core network completely. Gang Hayek had failed miserably once again. His desperate, pathetic attempts were becoming highly predictable. We traced the origin of the vicious cyber attack back to a hidden warehouse. Gang Yun did not call the police to handle this private family matter. He sent his own highly trained elite security forces to raid the dark abandoned building. The mercenaries easily captured the rogue hackers without firing a single shot. They confiscated all the hard drives, proving Gang Hayek paid them directly. We now had even more solid, undeniable evidence of his endless treacherous crimes. I told my father it was time to crush his older brother permanently. We could not allow this wounded snake to keep striking at our heels. Gang Yun agreed with a cold, serious nod. The final swift execution of his rival was drawing near. The morning sun cast a cold light over the vast chairman's private estate. My father walked through the heavy wooden doors with total confidence. He carried the hard drives containing the undeniable proof of his brother's treason. The old chairman sat behind his massive mahogany desk looking very tired. He had built this massive empire with his own blood and intense sweat. Seeing his own sons tear each other apart was a heavy burden on his aging, weary heart. Gang Yun placed the silver drives on the desk without uttering a single word. The chairman already knew what they contained before plugging them in. The air in the room was thick with a silent and incredibly heavy, chilling tension. The chairman finally spoke in a raspy voice filled with deep, deep sorrow. He said a kingdom cannot survive if there is a poisonous rot inside the walls. He picked up his gold phone to make the hardest call of his entire long life. Police sirens wailed loudly outside the luxurious penthouse of Gang Hayek. Heavily armed officers stormed the building to arrest the eldest son. He was dragged out in shiny silver handcuffs while news cameras flashed brightly everywhere. He screamed loud curses at my father and vowed to get his dark revenge. But his threats meant absolutely nothing in the face of solid iron law. The corporate world watched in shock as the former golden heir completely and utterly fell. I watched the live news broadcast from the safety of our Grand Era Tower. A deep sense of absolute peace finally settled over my weary royal soul. The biggest threat to our beautiful new kingdom had been permanently neutralized today. Gang Yun walked into the room and gently turned off the large television. He knelt down beside my chair and took my small hands in his warm grasp. He promised me that no one would ever dare to hurt or threaten our family ever again. Months passed and the vast company flourished under my father's strict rule. He proved to be a highly brilliant and incredibly just corporate leader. The stock prices hit historic new highs and our bitter rivals bowed in deep respect. I spent my days studying modern history and enjoying a true peaceful life. I no longer had to hide in dark, dirty closets or starve for basic meals. The tragic fate of the original Dana had been completely rewritten by my royal hands. The chairman officially named Gang Yun as the sole successor of the empire. A grand ceremony was held in the very same hall where I first chose him. It was a beautiful, poetic ending to a very long and incredibly brutal corporate war. I wore a beautiful modern dress that resembled my old royal silk garments. The guests whispered in awe as I walked beside my tall, handsome father. They knew I was the brilliant, tiny mastermind behind this glorious and massive victory. Later that night, we stood alone on the highest balcony of the Era Tower. The cool wind blew gently through my hair as I looked at the bright city. I thought of my real father from 1,000 years ago and smiled softly to the sky. Gang Yun asked me what I was thinking about with such a serious expression. I told him I was just admiring the beautiful kingdom we built together. He laughed softly and lifted me into his incredibly strong and very safe fatherly arms. He said he was the luckiest man on earth to have a daughter as smart as me. I hugged his neck tightly and rested my tired head against his broad shoulder. I finally found the pure, genuine love I had searched for in this brand new life. The spirit of Princess Gangri will live on inside this tiny modern body. I will protect my new family and ensure our grand legacy never fades away. This is my true happy ending and the bold beginning of our brilliant new modern reign. The following morning brought a strange sense of quiet to the massive estate. There were no more whispering servants or cruel, mocking glances. The entire staff had been replaced by loyal workers who deeply respected my father and me. Gang Yun woke up early and dressed in a sharp gray suit for his new role. He looked into my room and told me he had a special surprise waiting downstairs. I quickly changed into a pretty white dress and ran down the grand staircase. Sitting at the grand dining table was an elegant woman with a warm, gentle smile. My father introduced her as Madame Yu, the most prestigious private tutor in the city. He wanted me to have the finest modern education money could buy. Madame Yu handed me a stack of thick books covering history and mathematics. I opened the first book and smiled inwardly at the simple basic concepts. A princess of the Era Kingdom had already mastered complex politics and strategies. I decided to play the role of a brilliant prodigy to please my proud father. I solved the difficult math equations in seconds and recited history flawlessly. Madame Yu was absolutely terrified and amazed by my unnatural intelligence. She immediately called my father to report that I was a once-in-a-century genius. Gang Yun laughed so loudly that his voice echoed through the entire grand hall. He hugged me tightly and declared I would attend the elite Royal Academy. The Royal Academy was a school exclusively for the heirs of massive conglomerates. It was a vicious snake pit where young wealthy children fought for early dominance. I knew this would be my next battlefield to secure our grand empire. Gang Yun bought me a beautiful custom-tailored uniform with a shiny gold crest. He held my small hand tightly as we walked toward the massive iron school gates. The other wealthy parents stared at us with a mix of fear and deep envy. I walked into the grand classroom and scanned the faces of my new rich classmates. They were spoiled brats who looked down on anyone they deemed weak or poor. I took my seat at the very front and prepared to establish my royal dominance. A tall, arrogant boy named Minho approached my desk with a cruel, mocking smirk. He was the son of a rival logistics company that hated my grandfather. He slammed his hands on my desk and demanded I give up my premium seat just for him. I did not flinch or break eye contact with the foolish, arrogant young boy. I calmly stated that a true leader commands respect rather than begging for it. The entire classroom fell completely silent as they processed my cold, sharp words. Minho turned bright red with intense anger and raised his hand to strike me down. Before he could move, I grabbed his wrist with a swift and painful tight grip. I whispered that touching me would cost his father his entire logistics firm. He yanked his arm away and backed off with pure terror in his wide, trembling eyes. The other students quickly realized I was not a weak target to be messed with. I had successfully conquered the classroom on my very first day of school. Word of my fierce intimidation spread to the powerful parents by that afternoon. Minho's father frantically called Gang Yun to formally apologize for his son. My father was highly amused and praised my ruthless aristocratic discipline. I told my father that mercy is a privilege reserved only for the truly loyal. Enemies must be taught a harsh lesson so they never dare to strike us again. He looked at me with deep pride and agreed with my ancient royal philosophies. We spent the evening reviewing new construction plans for a massive megamall. The Era Group was expanding rapidly under my father's aggressive, bold vision. I pointed out a structural flaw that his top engineers had completely missed. He immediately fired the lazy engineers and hired a brand new competent team. My reputation as the silent, invisible brain behind the empire continued to grow. Even the old chairman started sending me rare, expensive gifts to win my favor. The grandfather sent me a beautiful, pure white stallion for my upcoming birthday. He knew I loved animals and wanted to ensure my loyalty remained with the family. I named the Horsewind and rode him across the vast private green fields. Gang Yun watched me ride from the grand balcony with a cup of warm black coffee. He had transformed from a useless drunken joke into a highly respected titan, and I had transformed from a broken, abused child into a powerful young queen. Our enemies were still hiding in the dark corners, waiting for a moment of weakness. But they would never find one as long as we stood together, united as a family. The Era Kingdom was thriving, and my glorious new reign had just started. Wara was furious after her massive public humiliation at the grand banquet. She begged her grandmother to transfer her to the elite Royal Academy. She wanted to destroy my flawless reputation from the inside out. I saw her walking through the courtyard with a group of mean, spoiled girls. She pointed at me and whispered vicious dark rumors into their eager ears. I ignored her pathetic childish attempts to ruin my perfect day. Wara approached my desk during the short lunch break with a fake sweet smile. She loudly asked if my father was still secretly visiting the dirty slums. The entire classroom went dead silent, waiting for my sharp reply. I stood up slowly and looked down at her shaking knees. I asked her if she had finally learned how to play the Geomungo properly. The students erupted in loud mocking laughter at my swift, brutal, and precise counterattack. Wara turned bright red and ran out of the classroom crying loudly. She was a weak pawn who relied entirely on the power of others. I was a true queen who forged my own destiny with sharp wit and absolute power. But Wara was not acting entirely alone in this brand new vicious scheme. I noticed a tall, quiet senior student watching me from the dark shadows. His name was Taejin, and he was the secret nephew of the exiled gang Hayek. Taejin was a brilliant hacker who despised my father for ruining his family. He'd planned to steal the Era Group's upcoming confidential bidding prices. He wanted to ensure our family lost the massive upcoming government contract. I caught him slipping a tiny silver flash drive into my heavy school bag. He wanted to frame me for the massive corporate data leak. It was a clever and deeply sinister plan, but I was always 5 steps ahead of my enemies. I secretly swapped the silver drive with a fake one filled with a nasty virus. When Taejin plugged it into his computer, his entire system completely crashed. All of his hidden illegal files were automatically sent to the police. He was dragged out of the elite academy in shiny handcuffs that very afternoon. Wara watched in absolute sheer terror as her final hope was crushed. She finally realized that crossing me was an absolute fatal massive mistake. While I handled the minor threats at school, my father faced a massive crisis. The old chairman suddenly collapsed during a heavy tense board meeting. He was rushed to the best private hospital in a heavily armored ambulance. The doctors said his heart was failing rapidly due to extreme severe stress. Gang Yun sat by his hospital bed holding his frail wrinkled hand tightly. Despite their rocky past, my father still truly loved the stubborn old man. The remaining greedy relatives immediately circled the hospital like vultures. They demanded the chairman's final will be read aloud right away. They wanted to strip my father of all his hard-earned massive corporate power. I arrived at the hospital and pushed past the screaming angry relatives. I stood beside my father and glared fiercely at the greedy, pathetic crowd. I loudly declared that anyone who spoke of death would be fired immediately. The room fell silent under my heavy, terrifying royal authority. The old chairman slowly opened his tired eyes and smiled weakly at me. He whispered that I was the only true brave tiger in this room full of cowardly, weak dogs. The chairman demanded his personal lawyer enter the quiet hospital room. He officially signed a document granting Gang Yun full absolute proxy power. My father now had complete legal control over every single company asset. The greedy relatives wept and cursed loudly in the pristine white hallway. Their long decades of plotting and deep scheming had completely failed. The useless, disgraced third son was now the undisputed king of the vast empire. Gang Yun kissed the chairman's hand and promised to protect the grand legacy. The old man nodded slowly and finally closed his eyes to rest peacefully. We had won the ultimate war, but the heavy crown now sat on our shoulders. I held my father's hand as we walked out of the sterile hospital building. The bright camera flashes of the hungry waiting media blinded our tired eyes. We stood tall and proud, ready to face whatever this new world demanded. The news of the proxy transfer shook the entire business world to its core. Gang Yun was no longer just a mere temporary placeholder. He was the absolute ruler of the Era Group with total control over every single major board decision. We returned to the massive Era Tower to prepare for his official coronation. The grand ceremony was meant to cement his absolute undisputed authority. I selected a sharp navy blue tailored suit that made him look like a modern king. He stood before the massive tall mirror and adjusted his silk dark tie. He looked at my small reflection standing proudly right beside him. He softly whispered that none of this incredible success would be possible without my pure love. I smiled and reminded him that a true king builds his own grand fortune. I merely pointed him toward the correct and righteous royal path. He laughed warmly and lifted me up into his incredibly strong and very safe protective arms. The grand ballroom was packed with anxious politicians and wealthy elites. They bowed deeply as my father walked down the long, shiny red carpet. The same people who once mocked his playboy lifestyle now feared his absolute massive power. He took the stage and delivered a flawless and highly inspiring speech. He promised to lead the vast company into a brand new era of global dominance. The crowd erupted into loud applause as he raised his glass to the bright future. But peace in the corporate world is always a very brief and fleeting illusion. The logistics firm owned by Minho's father saw a rare chance to strike. They mistakenly believed my father was too distracted by the chairman's severe illness. They launched a hostile takeover bid against our smaller shipping units. They aggressively bought up our vulnerable stocks through shady shell companies. It was a cowardly sneak attack designed to cripple our supply chain completely. Gang Yun called an emergency midnight meeting with his top financial advisors. They panicked and suggested we sell the shipping units to cut our heavy losses. I sat in the corner of the room and slammed my small hand on the wooden table. I loudly declared that the Eric Kingdom never surrenders a single inch of land. I proposed a brilliant ancient military tactic called the empty fort strategy. We would pretend to be completely weak to lure them into a massive fatal trap. My father smiled a wicked knowing smile and immediately agreed with my bold plan. He ordered the media team to leak fake reports of our severe financial ruin. The greedy logistics CEO took the bait and heavily overextended his finances. When their cash reserves were completely empty, we launched our massive counterattack. We bought their entire company for a fraction of its true original price. Minho's arrogant father was instantly left with absolutely nothing at all. With our vicious enemies completely crushed, we finally enjoyed true lasting peace. I asked my father to build a beautiful traditional garden on the estate grounds. I wanted a quiet, sacred place that resembled my ancient royal palace home. He hired the best landscape architects to plant cherry blossoms and lotus ponds. A beautiful wooden pavilion was constructed right in the center. I placed my ancient geomungo there and played my beautiful melodies every single afternoon. My biological parents tried to break into the estate one last desperate time. They were completely broke and living in a tiny, filthy apartment. The elite security guards easily caught them before they even reached the heavy outer gates. My father did not even bother to go down and see their pathetic crying faces. He simply ordered the guards to hand them over to the strict local police. They were charged with severe trespassing and locked away in a cold, dark prison cell. Wara and her bitter grandmother were permanently exiled to a rural countryside. They lost all their massive wealth and fancy, expensive designer clothes. They were forced to work in a small, dusty farm just to afford basic, cheap daily meals. Justice had been served to every single person who abused the original Dana. I visited her small grave and placed a single white blooming lily on the stone. I whispered that she could finally rest in peace because I had avenged her soul. The Era Group's massive success could not be contained within a single country. Gang Yun set his ambitious sights on conquering the vast global tech markets. He wanted to build advanced smart cities powered by clean, renewable green energy. We traveled together on a luxurious private jet to meet European royal families. They were utterly fascinated by my deep, extensive knowledge of history. I charmed kings and queens with my perfect etiquette and sharp, brilliant young mind. My father successfully signed massive global contracts across 3 entire continents. He became one of the most powerful and highly respected men on earth, but he never let his massive global fame change his warm, kind, gentle, fatherly heart. Every single weekend he would cancel all his highly important board meetings. We would go riding horses or watch silly cartoon movies in our pajamas. He always remembered that our pure deep bond was the true source of his absolute strength. The media dubbed me the invisible golden princess of the corporate world. They speculated about my massive future and the infinite power I would hold. I simply ignored their loud cameras and focused entirely on my strict elite daily studies. 5 long years passed quickly in a blur of massive success and deep happiness. I was now a teenager and the old chairman had miraculously recovered his health. He lived quietly in the countryside and proudly watched our grand empire grow. Gang Yun threw a massive lavish party for my highly anticipated Sweet 16. The entire Era Tower was decorated with thousands of bright blooming flowers. He gifted me a beautiful rare diamond necklace that sparkled like the bright stars. I stood on the grand stage and looked at the massive crowd of wealthy elites. But my eyes only searched for the loving, proud face of my amazing, brave father. I raised my crystal glass and toasted to the man who saved my sad, broken life. He walked up to the stage and hugged me tightly with tears in his warm eyes. He whispered that I was the one who truly saved him from his dark, empty life. We were 2 lost souls who found each other and built an unstoppable grand kingdom. My past life as Princess Gang Ri was a tragic tale of betrayal and sudden death, but my new life as Gang Dana is a glorious epic of absolute bright victory. I am the true Kingmaker and I will reign supreme over this modern corporate era. The massive global success of the Era Group attracted dangerous new enemies. A hidden syndicate known as the Black Lotus emerged from the dark shadows. They controlled underground global markets and wanted our new technology. They sent a mysterious black envelope to our Grand Era Tower penthouse. It contained a single blood red lotus flower and a threatening short letter. They demanded a 50% stake in our brand new smart city projects. Gang Yun threw the red lotus into the burning fireplace with a cold laugh. He refused to be intimidated by nameless cowards hiding in the deep dark. He ordered our elite security team to hunt down the Black Lotus leaders. I knew this enemy was far more dangerous than my greedy, foolish relatives. The Black Lotus operated like a highly trained ancient army of silent assassins. They used modern cyber warfare and ruthless physical violence combined. We increased the security perimeter around the entire massive corporate estate. I monitored all incoming digital traffic for any signs of a hidden breach. The silent war had officially begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. I told my father that a king must strike the snake before it can even bite. We needed to locate their main financial hub and destroy it completely. He agreed and deployed his best elite mercenaries into the underground. The syndicate retaliated quickly by attacking our main logistics network. They employed a legendary phantom hacker known only as the Ghost in the Dark. The Ghost managed to shut down our global shipping ports for 3 hours. Billions of dollars were instantly lost as massive cargo ships stood completely still. The board of directors panicked and begged my father to pay the ransom. Gang Yun slammed his fist on the table and demanded absolute silence. He declared that the Era Group never negotiates with petty digital terrorists. I quickly returned to my secure private terminal to track the Ghost's signal. I used a highly advanced algorithm I developed during my academy years. The Ghost was incredibly arrogant and left tiny digital breadcrumbs behind. I followed the hidden encrypted trail through multiple fake offshore servers. I finally pinned his exact physical location to a warehouse in Eastern Europe. My father did not waste a single second and called his private strike team. The mercenaries raided the cold warehouse and captured the arrogant hacker. They brought him back to our city for a very intense private interrogation. The Ghost was a young pale boy who thought he was completely untouchable. He cried loudly when my father threatened to lock him in a dark, deep cell. He quickly confessed everything and gave us the syndicate's main database. With the hacker defeated, we gained total access to the syndicate's secrets. We discovered they were hosting a massive illegal auction on a private island. They were planning to sell highly classified stolen military technology. Gang Yun decided we needed to attend this dangerous auction in complete disguise. It was a massive risk, but the potential reward was destroying them entirely. We prepared fake identities as wealthy, ruthless European arms dealers. I wore a dark, elegant dress and a sparkling masquerade mask to hide my face. My father wore a sharp black tuxedo and carried a hidden silver weapon. We boarded a private stealth helicopter and flew toward the secret island. The island fortress was heavily guarded by armed men and wild attack dogs. We presented our fake golden invitations and walked into the grand main hall. The room was filled with the most dangerous, wealthy criminals on Earth. I stayed close to my father and observed the enemy leaders with sharp eyes. They were completely unaware that the Era Group's king was standing right there. We waited patiently for the illegal auction to officially begin on stage. I noticed a familiar face hiding in the dark corner of the lavish grand room. It was the exiled older brother Gang Hayek sitting with the syndicate boss. He had sold his soul to the dark underground to get his pathetic revenge. The syndicate boss walked onto the grand stage and welcomed the vile guests. He proudly presented the stolen military blueprints on a massive bright screen. The greedy criminals began bidding hundreds of millions of dollars instantly. Gang Yun raised his numbered paddle and placed an impossibly high bid. The entire room went dead silent as they stared at the bold masked stranger. Gang Hayek narrowed his cold eyes and tried to recognize my father's stance. The syndicate boss happily accepted the massive bid and slammed his hammer. He invited my father to the back room to complete the dark financial transfer. I silently slipped a tiny tracking device onto the boss's dark heavy coat. We walked into the VIP lounge where heavily armed guards blocked the exits. Gang Hayek suddenly stood up and pointed a shaking finger at my calm father. He screamed that we were imposters and demanded the guards shoot us down. My father slowly removed his masquerade mask and smiled a cold, wicked smile. He looked at his terrified older brother with absolute pure dark disgust. The syndicate boss reached for his gun, but my father was much faster. He disarmed the boss in one swift, brutal motion and held him hostage. I pressed a hidden button on my silver watch to signal our strike team. The island fortress was about to become a massive, chaotic, burning battlefield. Loud explosions rocked the island as our elite mercenaries breached the walls. The criminal guests screamed in pure terror and ran blindly for the exits. The heavily armed Era security forces stormed the grand auction hall instantly. My father held the syndicate boss tightly while Gang Hayek tried to escape. I tripped the cowardly brother and pinned him firmly to the cold, hard floor. I whispered that a traitor's final fate is always absolute, utter ruin. The mercenaries quickly secured the entire massive island within 10 minutes. They arrested every single global criminal and confiscated the stolen tech. The Black Lotus Syndicate was completely dismantled in one single glorious night. Gang Yun handed the defeated syndicate boss over to international authorities. He ensured that the criminal network could never be rebuilt or funded again. Our massive global empire was finally safe from the underground shadows. We stood on the beautiful sandy beach and watched the police choppers land. The morning sun began to rise over the calm blue sparkling ocean waves. My father hugged me tightly and praised my incredibly brave tactical mind. Gang Hayek was dragged away in heavy chains, screaming loud, empty curses. He would spend the rest of his miserable, pathetic life in a maximum prison. The past was finally buried and our grand future was shining incredibly bright. We returned to the bustling city as celebrated heroes of the corporate world. The government publicly thanked the Era Group for stopping the global threat. Our stock prices doubled instantly and our wealth became totally infinite. I decided it was time to use our massive power for a truly noble grand cause. I asked my father to establish the Grand Era Royal Charity Foundation. We would build schools and modern hospitals for the poor and highly vulnerable. Gang Yun loved the brilliant idea and funded it with billions of dollars. He wanted to erase the dark, cruel legacy of his old, abusive, greedy parents. We focused on helping abandoned children who suffered like the original Dana. I personally oversaw the construction of a massive, beautiful orphanage. I ensured every single child received the best education and warm, loving care. I wanted them to know that they were truly valued and perfectly safe now. The media praised me as the gentle golden angel of the entire modern city, but I knew I was simply a fierce ancient warrior protecting her new people. The Era Kingdom's core values of justice and kindness were finally restored. My father often visited the orphanage to play simple games with the kids. He had completely shed his old selfish playboy persona forever and always. He was a true noble king who ruled his massive empire with a pure, warm heart. During a peaceful winter break, I decided to visit a grand national museum. They were hosting a special exhibition on the ancient fallen Era Kingdom. I walked through the quiet halls looking at the old faded royal artifacts. I saw a beautiful ancient painting of my real father, the great noble king. Tears filled my eyes as I remembered his warm smile and incredibly kind voice. He would be so incredibly proud of the massive empire I built in this life. I stopped in front of a glass display containing a broken wooden geomungo. The plaque said it belonged to the legendary brilliant Princess Gangri. It was the exact same instrument I used to play in the Grand Royal Gardens. A young handsome historian approached me and asked if I liked the old exhibit. He explained that Princess Gangri was a musical genius who died far too young. I smiled softly and told him her brave spirit still lives on today. I walked out of the cold museum feeling a deep, profound sense of closure. My past life was a beautiful tragedy that forged my incredibly strong soul. I no longer mourned the ancient kingdom because I had built a much better one. I returned to the Era Tower where my new father was waiting for me eagerly. We drank hot, sweet chocolate and watched the white snow fall over the city. I was exactly where I was always meant to be in this vast, endless universe. The Era Group expanded into advanced aerospace engineering the following year. My father wanted to build beautiful, massive rockets to explore the dark stars. It was a bold, impossible dream, but we always turned pure dreams into reality. I studied complex astrophysics and helped design the primary engine systems. My brilliant mind easily grasped the intricate, complex mathematical concepts. We hired the smartest engineers on Earth to build our first grand spaceship. Our vicious corporate rivals laughed and called the project a massive failure. They said a simple logistics company had no business in the deep, vast space. We completely ignored their petty jealousy and focused entirely on the work. The launch day finally arrived under a perfectly clear, bright blue sky. Millions of people watched the live broadcast from across the entire globe. My father and I stood in the command center holding our breath in deep silence. The massive white rocket ignited with a deafening, beautiful, loud roar. It pierced through the white clouds and successfully entered the dark orbit. The entire command center erupted in tears and incredibly loud, joyful cheers. We had officially conquered the Earth, and now we were conquering the stars. The Era legacy was immortalized in the vast, endless history of mankind. No one would ever dare to mock or challenge our ultimate supreme power again. Years passed and I finally graduated from the elite university with high honors. I was a beautiful, strong young woman ready to take the corporate throne. My father was getting older and wanted to retire to the peaceful countryside. He called a final grand board meeting to officially announce his retirement. He named me the brand new supreme chairwoman of the entire Era Group empire. The loyal board members stood up and clapped with deep, genuine, pure respect. I took the high seat at the head of the massive, long mahogany table. I looked at the powerful executives who now answered directly to my commands. I promised to lead them with absolute, fierce loyalty and brilliant, sharp vision. A young, arrogant rival CEO tried to test my authority during my first week. He threatened to break a massive, crucial contract if I did not lower prices. He thought I was just a weak, inexperienced girl who would easily panic. I completely destroyed his entire company's stock value in exactly 2 hours. I used a complex financial maneuver that left him absolutely, totally bankrupt. He begged for mercy, but I simply hung up the phone with a cold, sharp smile. The entire global business world quickly learned the most important rule. You never ever challenge the brilliant Golden Queen of the Era Empire. I was ruthless to my dark enemies but incredibly kind to my loyal true friends. I bought a massive beautiful estate in the peaceful green quiet countryside. I moved my father there so he could live his final golden years in peace. He spent his days riding his beloved horses and reading old classic books. I visited him every single weekend without fail, no matter how incredibly busy I was. We would walk through the blooming cherry blossoms and talk about the future. He always told me I was the absolute greatest blessing of his entire life. The tragic, painful memories of the original abused Dana were completely gone. The ancient sorrow of Princess Gangri was fully healed and finally laid to rest. I was simply Gang Dana, the most powerful and brilliant woman on earth. I stood on the balcony of my grand penthouse looking at the glowing city. The Era Tower stood as a massive shining beacon of absolute pure victory. I had successfully turned a disgraced foolish playboy into a legendary king. And in doing so, I had rightfully claimed my own glorious modern crown. The war was completely over and the beautiful golden age had finally arrived. This is the grand unbreakable story of my truly glorious endless royal reign. The bright morning sun cast a golden glow over the massive towering Era Tower. I stood by the large glass window and sipped my hot sweet coffee. Today was the start of a brand new grand era for our global corporate empire completely. My amazing father was finally enjoying his completely peaceful retirement days. He spent hours tending to his beautiful large green organic gardens now. It made my heart incredibly happy to see him free of toxic heavy stress forever. But my own life was moving at a very incredibly fast and highly demanding pace. As the supreme chairwoman, I had to oversee thousands of loyal staffs daily. Every single tiny decision I made impacted massive global markets completely. I walked into the massive grand boardroom for a highly important morning meeting. We were planning to acquire a brand new massive European technology firm today. The entire executive board looked at me with deep pure respect and awe. They knew that I possessed the brilliant mind of an ancient royal conqueror now. I presented my flawless strategic plan on the bright massive digital screen. Within exactly 20 minutes, the whole board approved my aggressive buyout. After the incredibly successful meeting, I received a highly urgent secure call. It was from our elite global intelligence team stationed in hidden dark areas. They found a tiny lingering traces of the old defeated Black Lotus group. I refused to let a single enemy survive to threaten our glorious bright futures. I immediately dispatched our most ruthless elite strike team to the secret base. The Era Kingdom never shows any mercy to those who plot dark treasons. By midnight, the hidden rogue faction was entirely eradicated without any issue. I watched the live secure feed from my grand office with a cold, satisfied smile. My grand empire was absolutely impenetrable and perfectly fully secure. I drove my sleek black sports car down the empty highway toward the countryside. I wanted to celebrate this final sweet silent victory with my beloved father. The cool night wind blew through my long dark hair as I drove very fast. When I arrived at the grand country estate, the bright morning sun was rising up. My father was already awake and drinking his sweet tea on the wooden porch. He smiled warmly when he saw my car pulling into the long stone driveway. I told him the final hidden enemy threat was finally and completely destroyed. He patted my hand and said he never doubted my brilliant, sharp, strong mind. We sat in quiet, comfortable silence, enjoying the beautiful, pure nature view. He looked at me with pure pride and said I was the greatest ruler of all time. I leaned my head on his shoulders and felt a deep sense of truly total peace. This was the exact happy ending the original poor Dana always hugely wanted. I walked back to my shiny dark car and opened the heavy armored doors slowly. I looked back at the huge house one last time and smiled at my good father. The whole world was finally mine and the Grand Era Kingdom was safely reborn. This is the grand timeless legend of the fierce and highly brilliant princess, a young girl who totally conquered a dark modern world using an ancient mind. The Kingmaker has completely finished her grand epic tales of true victory.